Good morning, everyone. Some amazing things, right? Just the power of will and the power to do something. And we hear these stories that are just so inspiring. Welcome to the panel on futures created by digital health. It's an honor and a privilege to be moderating this. My name is Ruchin Kansal. They say everyone has 7 lives. I'm trying to live all of those 7 lives in my one life. So I started being an architect, a practicing architect, and then I became a management consultant to the healthcare industry. And then had the fortune of setting up a business innovation group at Boehringer Ingelheim, which is one of the world's largest privately held pharma companies, and we dabbled a lot with digital health. And now I'm an independent advisor working with companies like Outcome Health and multiple startups on just helping them figure out how to scale technology for adoption in the whole healthcare ecosystem. And I'm not an expert in digital health, and my distinguished guests here have done a lot more than I have, but my goal here will be just to engage us all in a dialogue on how we can collectively really drive the futures that we all aspire for. So on the stage, I don't need to introduce Dana, Bodo, and Ali again, but I also have David King joining us from Hospital for Special Surgery in New York. He's the managing director for global innovation there. And before we get into the discussion, just want to provide a few opening thoughts on digital health and ask you all a question. So digital health has been around for many years now, right? And there are as many applications as you can think of, everything from how it is being applied to communicate better, to how we heard earlier talk about creating solutions that allow you to engage in a much more medically significant and meaningful way. But the question is it hope or hype, right? I mean, it's been around. There's a lot of promise, but there's a lot of clutter. There are too many solutions facing the same problems. At least that's the problem I faced when I was looking at digital from our company perspective. I would get pitches from at least 10 companies trying to solve for the same problem, and almost in similar ways. How do you differentiate? And then the other thing is, in our healthcare system, which is so much insurance-based, payments-based system, there is still not a lot of willingness to pay for digital health-based technologies or solutions. So where does that leave us, right? So all of us experience health. The question I have for all of you is, raise your hands if you think digital health can really drive a better future for our healthcare. Okay. Now raise your hands if you don't think that's true. Well, that's very encouraging. I mean, this is probably the only session I've been in where I've not seen a 50-50 split of hands. And so that tells me that this group is really motivated and really looking forward to really adapting the possibilities here. So with that, let me turn to my panel. And I'll start with you, David. Okay. We heard how Dana, how Bodo, and how Ali are really very passionately driving their passion of creating futures. Talk to us a little bit about yourself and what you are passionate about and how you think you personally are driving some of the healthcare future.
Perfect. Well, let me first say what a privilege it is to be here and to learn from you all in the audience in this panel. I have the best job in the world. I get to work with inventors and entrepreneurs every day, like Bodo and Aaliyah and Dana, who are really creating the future. And my passion or my goal here and the reason for attending is, we've talked a lot about innovation as sort of a team sport. And I think providers like my organization and the place we sit today in Stanford and others have a very active role, or should play a very active role in helping to co-create that future. And so that's what my passion is. I'm fortunate to work for the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City. And for those of you who may not know who we are, we're an orthopedics and sports medicine, musculoskeletal focused facility. We're a global leader in that space, and we look to create. My team looks to create new technologies, both things that our inventors and surgeons create sort of inside out, as well as collaborating with early stage companies outside in, coming to our organization to help build the thing that they're working on and make that a reality. I've been in healthcare, the provider side for 15 years. I worked with a number of startups and been focused the whole time exclusively on early stage technologies and digital health.
Excellent. So can you share some specific examples where HSS is actually taking what the team of innovators is doing and applying in the healthcare ecosystem? Sure.
Yeah. Let me just profile one of the companies who got their start at HSS about 2 years ago. A team of founders, as well as some venture capital, came with an idea around creating a more empathetic platform to better take care of patients. And we're HSS. We're fortunate to be in the top decile of performance for patient satisfaction and high net promoter score. So they came to us and said, look, you guys know a lot about how to manage and how to treat patients empathetically, and we're looking to build a technology that's based on that, and how do we scale that out? And that company is called Docent Health. So they've launched, they're actively growing, have raised a significant amount of money from very premier venture capital firm, and are growing their platform. But what I will say is, working with them to build their technology, but we've been live with their platform for a year now, and not only has it has allowed us to scale essentially to double the number of active patients who are managed by what we call our ambassador services program. So that's our concierge sort of high impact team focused on patient experience, and it's allowed them to double that experience, to scale that know-how with relatively the same team size. So we have big hopes for them, and that's an example of working alongside early stage company to not only develop their technology, but also to reap the benefits of the thing that they're building.
So it looks like you guys have kind of figured out how to take startups and bring them in. But let me ask you, Dana, and Bod and Alia. All of you are trying to create solutions that, if are delivered at scale, can have a very broad impact in how we will experience healthcare in the future. Now, how do you see yourself challenged by creating that scale? Do you see this ecosystem being very adaptive and open to really taking what you have and helping you scale it, or it is very challenging to really get that done? So open to all three of you. Dana, maybe you want to start.
Sure. I see the ecosystem as open and adaptive. Obviously, I'm working with the system, but I think one of the challenges that exist, whether or not you consider it open, is the alignment of resources and prioritization. So patients so much are putting themselves out there and saying, this is what needs to be done. And a lot of the healthcare system says, yes, we hear you, you're a patient, we're listening. But then they go on doing what they were doing. And they do not provide the resources to patients, whether that's financial, whether that's other types of support. And they also don't change what they're doing as a result. So yes, the system is adaptive to working with us, but the system itself needs to adapt more to working in a different way.
I'll go ahead and piggyback on that and say that I completely agree. I think the incentives are not aligned. So you have payers and systems that have their own incentives and their own motivation. And sometimes it's really hard to crack that. So as much as they want to, they have to think about the bottom line, which is the dollar. And so getting to scale is also pretty difficult, because all of us experience healthcare, we interact with it, but the bureaucracy that's in place right now makes it very challenging for new technology to get adopted. So unless you have an integrated platform that things can plug into, everything sort of comes as a silo. So for instance, if you think about physicians, why don't they adopt new technology to help them provide and deliver better care? It's because every additional app that they have to use, or hardware or piece of software, doesn't integrate with everything else that they use. So it's adding additional time charting or additional time doing work that is taking away from patient care. So it's kind of this huge, I would say, it's kind of messy right now. And so if we can figure out a way to create that platform, then I think we'll be in a better place.
Bodo, your views?
The project that we're doing is not something we're going to be taking up further ourselves, but we were able to build this through the help of hundreds of individuals, all helping a small bit. And I think it's important that, just like your own work, that openness really drives innovation and really drives the ability to scale. So even though we're not taking this further, there are 100 parents now that are able to take this further themselves, or other individuals for whatever use case they may have. And I think that wouldn't be possible if we were to somehow close this out. The fact that it is open allows it to scale.
And
you were going to say something, Dana, yeah?
Yeah, and I think when we talk about scale, we often act like one size must fits all, and every solution must work for tens of thousands, if not millions of people. And we forget the value of these small, customizable projects that works really, really well for individuals. So yes, scale is important, but it's about enabling it to get to the right people.
Yeah.
And the right people may be a rare disease with a patient population of 20, and it might be 2 million. But when we talk about scale, we need to not just think about the big scale, but think about the appropriate scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. So what I heard you guys talk about is that the system is open and adaptive and willing to listen, but the bureaucracy and the incentives get in the way. And then you have to really apply the solutions to the right audience. So it looks like, big problems, right? It's a big system that is really incumbent and doesn't know how to get out of its own way. And then, we are all trying to make a change. So let's switch gears a little bit, right? And then let's talk about people here on the stage as patients. And we work in the system and we work outside of the system. But if we think of ourselves as patients and we want to create the perfect healthcare future enabled by technology, how would we do that? Put yourselves in patient shoes. Forget you work for HSS. Forget you work at Stanford Medicine X. And if you want the perfect world as a patient, how will you create that future?
Well, I'm maybe the most recent patient on the panel. July the 4th, I had a major wrist laceration unexpectedly and was treated at some pretty premier institutions in New York. But just reminded through that experience of, even in the best organizations, really how difficult it is for patients to navigate the system, to play an active role. I mean, I think the ability for patients to be advocates for themselves, patients and their caregivers, to be advocates for themselves in their care. And I think their roles that we play as on the provider side in helping to not only create a culture that promotes that, but also to help find technologies and opportunities that help unleash that potential. The tweet earlier, no one is more engaged than the patient in their care. I mean, how do we, as providers, hear those patients' viewpoints, and how do we sort of walk alongside them in this it's a really scary journey. And I've been in it for 15 years, and it was scary for me. So I imagine it's very scary for most.
I think something for the healthcare system to think about is thinking about people as the whole patient. Yes, I'm a person with diabetes, but one of the reasons I think language matters in terms of how we talk about care, how we approach interacting with each other, is when people label me as a diabetic, I dislike being labeled by my disease because I am more than the fact that I don't produce insulin. And my health is more than just diabetes. Sometimes healthcare providers are so focused on that, they don't actually take care of what I'm there for. And it totally derails the point of that healthcare encounter. And I think that's something we need to work on, is seeing the big picture. And one solution to that is to having those healthcare encounters be more open-ended and start with, tell me why you're here. What would you like to achieve today? And for healthcare providers to say, what is something important for me to know? And that enables the patient to say, well, I have diabetes, but here's why I'm here and here's what's important. Or not use diabetes if that's not relevant to the conversation. Actually, many of my healthcare providers don't know that I have an artificial pancreas. They've never asked anything about my diabetes management, and they've completely ignored the rest of me than what they're there to take care of. And that's a huge missed opportunity, and it could cause issues in health when you ignore the whole person.
I would have to echo Dana's sentiments completely. I was actually recently a patient as well. So as I mentioned, I had a baby 4 weeks ago, and then I started experiencing this left-sided chest pain about a week ago, and I kind of put it off, and I thought, oh gosh, it's probably like a pulled muscle. And then it became more and more constant. I ended up in the ER with this inspiratory chest pain, and ended up having to get a CT scan to rule out a pulmonary embolism or a deadly blood clot. And everything turned out to be fine, but that experience once again put me in a place where I was vulnerable and not in control. And what I realized is I wanted some of that control back. So as a patient, you want control over your destiny and sort of over what the next steps are. You kind of don't want to know, you kind of want to know what the next steps are. You want to be able to anticipate things. And so I had my CT scan, and then I was sort of anticipating, well, where do I follow up? Or, who's going to check up on me? Or we noticed this thing was wrong, so now what? And I think the system needs to take that into account and make sure that whether it's doctors or healthcare providers or the system that puts measures in place to sort of make this a healthcare continuum, because it's not, episodic care we know is not really very helpful and effective. It's really like a continuum. So as a patient, I want to know, where do I get my records? Who do I see next? What's the best specialist for this thing that I'm experiencing? Not just, the here and now. Okay, I as your doctor, I'm done with this episode, and you're on your own. So,
I just want to echo that. I really appreciate it being somewhat in control, and the doctor that was treating Lorelei, luckily was able to tell us that she didn't quite know what was going on, and she was open up and upfront about that. She didn't have the expertise that she needed, and she didn't quite know where to go with things, and that was really, really helpful. So we were all on the same page. We weren't just, okay, everything that's going on, and we'll just trust. I found that really, really useful.
So what's interesting is, and maybe it was my line of questioning, but when we talked about the future of healthcare and what we really want out of it, we all talked about empathy and compassion and knowing us all, our providers knowing us as patients. With digital health there?
I guess I'll start. I think that the empathy has to be built into the technology. So my personal belief is that digital health solutions won't work unless they take into account, our nature and the way that we want to connect with each other as humans, and what makes things convenient for us. And so if something is designed to not work with other technology that it needs to work with, then we're more likely not to use it. Or if it's not designed in an empathetic way and in a seamless, integrated way, then we're more likely to not use it.
Other thoughts?
I think we have to start with thinking about the patient first and designing the device. I think a lot of healthcare devices have been traditionally designed thinking about the company and how they're going to use the data. And then second, maybe the doctor, the hospital. And then oftentimes the patient isn't thought about at all in terms of how they get their data. And that is true in terms of usability and the design experience, is that the patient's like, oh, by the way, this is what the patient might want, but it's lower on the priority list. And we have to completely reverse that and start with thinking about the people and their data and how they're going to access it and how they're going to use it, and remembering that one size doesn't fit all. Mm-hmm. And also, we don't know what technology holds. So when we lock ourselves into a very specific device or system that can't adapt to a user, that is going to be outdated before it comes to market. And we need to be building technologies and designing things that are customizable person to person, but also enable the company to take advantage of other things as they come out, versus have this one device that's sold for years and years and years that doesn't get updated and then just puts patients at a disadvantage.
And I would agree with my colleagues up here. I mean, I think that need to create an open and collaborative environment, in the provider side, to be part of that experience, not only helps inform the technology and informs what a commercial market may look like for the technology, but it opens up the potential to better understand, to Dana's slide earlier, the problem you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. And I see, and I work with so many early stage companies who perceive the problem in a specific way that may not in fact be the right definition of the problem. So it's a sort of a solution looking for a problem. And I think, as providers or payers or other members of the care continuum, being open to being part of that co-creation experience to better inform technology to be built for patients and real users.
I liked your point actually about being able to iterate. I think the first solution you come up with is not necessarily always the best. You need to be able to take feedback from patients and providers and the system and just like keep iterating until you get to a better product or service. So making sure that that's part of the process is important, which becomes hard when you're talking about devices because with FDA approval, you can't really continue to iterate very quickly.
Yeah, but what I liked about the discussion is that start with the problem you're trying to solve, and then bring empathy and compassion and technology together to solve for the problem rather than each by itself being a means to an end. It has to be a collective.
Yeah, and as we're talking about not having things in a vacuum, also remember the patient is not in a vacuum. So we have loved ones, we have parents, we have siblings and spouses and partners and friends, and their interaction with us and the solutions that we're designing for is also important because the patient is not just on an island by themselves. We're surrounded by support, and healthcare needs to be thinking about that as well.
Great. Now, I'm just being cognizant of time. Maybe we have time for a couple of questions from the audience for our panelists. Any questions you have? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I actually just tweeted, so I apologize if I was looking at my phone while you all were talking, but this feels so much like a revolutionary act when you're being DIY and willing to share information, because it feels like this proprietariness at a lot of our top universities and corporations means that you don't publish and you don't share because that is a commodity. And so I just so respect that you chose to do that while you were clearly going through something on your own and didn't have to do that. So I guess specifically from Bodo and Dana, I wanted to hear, was that a conscious decision on your part of, I could make a bunch of money if I take notes and keep it, get through this, and do something with it, or was it, you're so caught up in the moment?
Would you like to go first?
So I come from a background in open innovation, and it's the power of openness trumps I think if we had taken on this project as a closed project, we wouldn't have gotten the experts involved in the project to begin with. So it would have restricted who would have helped us, and we wouldn't have gotten this far. The fact that it is open and the fact that we were able to attract the experts to help us made it successful. And now it's accessible for anyone to use. So I don't think that was an option for us.
For me, I was diagnosed in high school, and so if I had been diagnosed, now when this was happening, my response might have been different, because when I was diagnosed, my first instinct was I don't want anybody to know that I have diabetes. And now I think more people know me because I have diabetes than anything else, which is ironic. But because I had found a solution for myself, because of somebody openly sharing, and because I believe in using social media to communicate, to me it was a no-brainer to share as we went. And I would not have been able to close the loop for myself had other people not been sharing. And so I don't think I could have deviated away from that. That just didn't feel right. And even the project that I'm pursuing that's supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, one of the principles of that project is going to be openness. And so all of our materials created by the project are going to be open source, so that anybody who wants to tap into that as we develop, they're going to be able to tap in and contribute to the project. But also, we don't want to do the traditional waiting game in terms of publication, whether it's a traditional academic publication or anything else. And so we want to find ways to be able to share directly back with the communities that will help people tonight. So when somebody's upset and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they're on the internet looking for a solution, that this can give them hope or something practical that they can actually use, in addition to publishing for wider audiences. And that's what I want to encourage more of. It's not an either or. You can do both of the sharing now and doing the traditional publications and the traditional everything else. It's not an either or.
Please. Do we have mics? Yeah, there's one. I think there was a gentleman back there on the left. Back there.
Hi, Sean Kuhn. Yeah, this is very inspiring, and I'm sure there's some intent to it, but there's sort of a wonderful spectrum here coming from the sort of top-down and provided when we talk about the sort of more futuristic medical clinic. It's very general, right? This is a general way to do something wonderful, but it's very designed and expert-based. And on the other end, you have something that's very specific. The other two solutions that are very specific and kind of a as cheap as possible sort of approach. You know, what can I do that's very specific just for me, that is as simple and cheap as I can do it. And these are kind of very divergent areas of innovation, right? But where most people get care is in the middle. And so I'm wondering, you know, what are the kinds of bridges that can take some of these things from each end and bring them to sort of a wider audience, maybe for each of you or some of you. How can you see a piece or all of what you did come to a wider general mainstream medical care community? And what are the kinds of champions that would do that? Because I see why each of you, you know, might be a champion of the thing that you worked on or created, but who would be the champions that sort of bring that to the wider population?
I think that's a great question. I'd love to go first. That's exactly what my project is hoping to do, is to help to begin to establish the patterns of bridging the gaps between patients doing their own thing in the DIY communities and healthcare doing its own thing, and really figuring out how to meet in the middle. There's not been a lot of examples that I know of this type of collaboration where there's an individual patient collaborating with traditional researchers and institutions. And one of the reasons it's significant is because as I innovated and developed and started talking about open APS, people told me to create a nonprofit. They told me to create a company. It went against all the advice I ever got to stay as an individual. And even as the principal investigator on the study, I'm doing it as an individual. And we need to find more ways for people to be able to engage when they want, how they want, without it taking over their entire lives or requiring them to start a company, because that kind of goes into the way that healthcare was always done, and it moves back into being an island. And we needed to figure out how to have more of these collaborations and more of these partnerships, exactly to your point, to broaden these areas of collaborations and make them more widely accessible.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Dina's thoughts on that. Also would say that from the startup perspective, so we have tons of companies in the ecosystem that are coming up with all these solutions, raising money, and trying to scale as quickly as they can. I would sort of take the Tesla model and say, at first, technology is very expensive and only available to, the wealthy. But as we innovate and as we, iterate and make it better and better, we can also make it cheaper and cheaper. And so that is actually our hope at Forward, is that we can, decrease the cost of the things that we're offering, and even take certain aspects of what we're developing, whether it's hardware or software, and place them in other places so that they can be used by a wider population of people to sort of empower them and help them through various aspects of their health.
And thank you for that. I know we are beyond time, and I know audience have a lot of questions, but maybe we can take those as we mingle for lunch. But I would like to close with just one last question to all of you. 3 words. What will it take to create the future of healthcare that we want? Just 3 words.
Well, so
we'll start with David.
Yeah, I'll steal from Larry this morning. I mean, I think optimism for sure, inclusiveness. We've talked about that a lot, and really just tenacity. I mean, it takes these guys passionately pursuing the thing that they're about. So tenacity on all sides.
So 3 words. Dana.
I'd say make it happen. Don't wait.
Great.
I would say open social innovation.
I would say awareness, creativity, and engagement.
Excellent. So some thoughts to consider as we all think of our roles and how we can create the future we want. And digital will play a part of that, but there's a lot more to our future than just digital. It's empathy, it's compassion, it's how everything comes together. So thank you all. Thank you for participating in this, and looking forward to chatting with everyone.